It was the kind of fog that doesn't burn off by noon, the kind that sinks low and heavy, clings to the road like it's hiding something. On that morning, the porch light flickered just once and then never again. Inside, the coffee was still warm. My daughter's backpack sat by the door. My shoes were still in the hallway, but I was gone. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from down in the comments and tap that like and subscribe if stories like this ever touched your town or your family. Every click helps bring a forgotten voice back into the light. I'm Mara Ellison. 7 years ago, I was 42 living on Apple Blossom Drive just outside Asheville, North Carolina. We had a white fence that needed painting every spring, a porch swing that creaked just right at night, and neighbors who waved even if they didn't know your name. Greg and I had been married 12 years. We met at a church barbecue back in '05 and stayed because we were both the kind of people who liked early mornings and quiet kitchens. Our son Ben had just started 2nd grade. Lila, our 5-year-old, was still at home most days except for preschool twice a week. I worked part-time as a nurse at Mountain Ridge Pediatrics just off Charlotte Street 3 days a week early shift. The rest of my time was spent in the yard, folding laundry, packing snacks shaped like animals. It wasn't glamorous, but it was solid. And for a long time, I thought that was enough to keep us safe. The thing about living a quiet life is that you assume everything will stay in place unless you move it. You trust that if you lock the door and pay your bills and show up to work on time, the world will leave you alone. But things start to shift before you realize they're shifting. It was little things at first, the porch light for one. Greg put it on a timer so it would switch off at 6:30 every morning. But some days it flickered, not broken, just hesitant, like it was deciding. I remember standing in the doorway one morning watching it blink out and thinking, that's not right. Then came the dreams. I never used to dream, or if I did, I forgot them. But that fall I kept seeing doors, hallways full of them, every door locked. I'd wake up with my heart racing, no reason why. I didn't tell Greg. He was working more long hours phone calls in the garage. I chalked it up to stress. One evening I asked my sister if she ever felt like someone could be watching you without you knowing. She laughed and said I was spending too much time on true crime podcasts. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was imagining things. But I started changing my route to work, took the long way, avoided turning left at certain lights. I told myself it was about traffic. But deep down I knew it wasn't. At the clinic I once froze in the hallway. There was a photo of family I didn't recognize, 3 kids, and a woman who looked just enough like me to make my chest go tight. I stood there too long. A coworker asked if I was okay. I said yes, but my hands were shaking. The last normal night I remember was a Sunday. We had cinnamon toast for breakfast the next morning. I always made it for Ben before school. I set out 2 plates. I packed Lila's backpack. I double-checked the porch timer. Everything was routine. But when Greg came downstairs at 6:32, I wasn't there. The coffee was still warm. My phone was on the nightstand. My car was locked in the garage. And in the muddy patch under the back deck, there was one footprint that didn't belong to anyone in the house. Not his, not Ben's, not Lila's. Just one step. And then, nothing. Detective Karen Monroe was at our house before 8. She moved quietly, deliberately, like someone who'd seen too many scenes that looked just like this. She didn't ask us to sit down. She didn't say it was too soon to panic. She just started walking the perimeter of the living room, eyes landing on the empty coffee cup, the 2 plates at the table, the backpack by the door. She asked Greg if the garage was locked. He said yes. She checked anyway. The car was there. Locked, cold, nothing out of place, not a smudge on the paint or a stray thread on the seat. She popped the trunk, checked beneath the floor mat, glanced up at the security light above the garage. Then she walked out back down the 2 steps from the porch to the edge of the grass. That's where she saw one shoe print in the damp dirt beneath the deck. Just one. It wasn't Greg's. It was too big to be Ben's, too wide to be mine. The tread looked newer than anything we owned. She asked for a list of my shoes. Greg brought out the box from the closet. Every pair was accounted for except a set of white Skechers I kept by the back door for yard work. I hadn't worn them in weeks. Neighbors began drifting over not long after the squad car showed up. Nobody knocked. They just lingered at the edge of their lawns, arms crossed, eyes darting to the porch, to the windows, to the officer marking off the flower bed by the oak tree. Mr. Flanders, from 2 houses down, said he saw headlights in the alley behind his yard around 6:30. The Kinders next door claimed their dog had gone crazy, barking at something out front, but they couldn't see what. Mrs. Glenn said she thought she heard a woman's voice, just one sentence. "I'm sorry," followed by nothing. Nobody saw a vehicle. No one saw anyone walk away. The fog that morning had made everything look like smoke. Detective Monroe didn't say much. She took notes, thanked people for their time, then turned back to us and asked if we'd noticed anything unusual in the days leading up. Greg said no. I hadn't told him about the dreams. I hadn't told anyone. By the end of the day, a missing person alert had gone out. Officers walked the creek beds. K-9 units searched the woods. A volunteer tent went up near the church. They found nothing. No torn fabric, no dropped phone, no tire tracks or food wrappers or anything that looked like someone trying to leave or trying to hide. My phone was still on the nightstand. My purse was untouched. There were no calls, no texts, no diary entries saying goodbye. The porch light stayed off that night and every night after. The media caught wind by day 3. A few stations aired the story, "Mother of 2 respected nurse vanishes without a trace." Greg gave one interview on the front steps. He looked straight into the camera and said, "I would never leave the kids, not without a reason." Then he stopped talking to reporters altogether. The longer I stayed gone, the more people began to doubt him. They asked if we were having problems, if we'd argued, if there was someone else. There wasn't. There never had been. But that didn't stop the speculation. Online forums made maps of our neighborhood. Reddit threads dissected photos of our front door. A few strangers even showed up pretending to be psychics. They said I was buried nearby, that I'd been taken by someone close, that I'd been seen at a diner 3 towns over. None of it held. On day 5, Detective Monroe received a letter. It was typed unsigned, postmarked from a town 2 hours east. It said only, "She's not missing. She never was." The paper had no prints, no DNA, same font all the way through. The envelope was standard white, licked shut. She didn't show it to Greg right away. She waited until a second letter arrived 3 days later, this one from a different town, same message, same formatting. A third came the next week. Always from somewhere new, always saying the same thing. On day 12, my keycard from the pediatric clinic was deactivated. On day 19, Greg signed a release allowing police to access my medical and employment records. There were no red flags, no prescriptions, no history of depression or distress, nothing but routine checkups and clean bills of health. On day 27, the kids started therapy. Lila was still too young to understand. Ben, though, he wouldn't stop asking questions. He thought maybe I was playing a game or testing them. One night he pulled every pair of shoes out of the hallway closet looking for my missing ones. He thought if he found them, I'd come back. Detective Monroe kept checking in. She'd stop by the clinic, flip through my work schedule, talk to my coworkers. She found a few spiral notebooks I kept in my locker, my lists notes to self-reminders. She read through every page. I hadn't written anything alarming, just everyday things. What to pack for Lila's snack day, which thermometer needed replacing, a grocery list that included syrup apples and birthday candles. But in the margins of one entry dated the Friday before I disappeared, there was a sentence written in tiny cursive. "If the light flickers again, I'll know it's time." By day 35, the official search was scaled back. The reward money sat unclaimed. The porch light was left off. Greg stopped taking the kids to church because of the way people stared. One morning, someone placed a bouquet of lilies on our front step with no card. That was the last thing anyone left. After that, the silence took over. A year passed, then another. Greg eventually took the flyers down. He boxed up my clothes. Ben stopped bringing my photo to show and tell. Lila no longer asked where I was. They made new routines, filled the space with something like normal. But one night, just past the 7-year mark, the automatic doors of Asheville General opened, and I walked in. I asked for Detective Karen Monroe by name. The receptionist said she didn't work there, but I knew she'd come. When she arrived, I looked her in the eye and said 6 words. I was never really missing, I told her. And I meant it. At least I thought I did. But nothing after that moment made sense, not to her, not to Greg, and not to me. Because when they pulled my file, they found a death certificate. Issued 6 years ago. Listed cause fatal vehicle accident. State Tennessee. But no body had ever been found. And the name on the paperwork, Dr. Helen Traz. A woman I'd never heard of. Or at least I didn't think I had. Detective Monroe didn't blink when I said the name on the certificate meant nothing to me. She just nodded once and turned the folder toward herself, flipping the page. I could see the DMV letterhead from where I sat. Under my name, Mara Ellison, it read, Status, deceased. Registered in Tennessee. She didn't ask if I was lying. She asked where I'd been living for the past 7 years. I gave her an address off Charlotte Street, not far from where my clinic used to be. Apartment 2C, 3rd floor. Beige door. I said I paid cash, kept quiet, didn't see much of anyone. She asked what name I gave on the lease. I said my own. She didn't respond, just excused herself and stepped out of the room. An hour later, she came back. Her face had changed, not suspicious, not cold, just more still than before. She sat down and said, the name on the lease was Erica Caldwell. I told her that wasn't possible. I'd never used another name. She didn't argue. She just placed a photograph on the table. It was the apartment. My apartment. Same pale green curtains, same narrow stovetop. There was a framed photo on the end table, one of Ben and Lila smiling with sidewalk chalk on their faces. I didn't remember framing it. I didn't remember printing it. But I remembered the day it was taken. Taped to the back of the frame was a receipt from a pharmacy on Lexington Avenue. Paid in cash. Name listed Erica Caldwell. The date was from 3 weeks earlier. That's when things started to fracture. I told her I didn't understand. She leaned in slightly and asked if I'd be willing to provide fingerprints. I said yes. They swabbed my cheek too for DNA. The results came back later that week, a confirmed match. I was me. No question. But officially, I didn't exist. Not under Mara Ellison. That file had been closed, my license marked inactive. The death certificate verified and filed by someone who hadn't been alive in over a decade. Dr. Helen Traz, the listed coroner, had died in 2002. Greg didn't answer the phone when the hospital called him. They tried twice. It wasn't until the news report aired that afternoon, local coverage, a brief clip with my name in the headline, that he found out. Someone in his office brought it to him. He saw my face on the screen, dropped his coffee on the floor, and drove straight home. I didn't see him that night, but I heard about the conversation with his wife, Rachel. They'd been married 5 years. Lila was 12 now. Ben had just turned 14. Neither of them had been told anything yet. I was placed in protective housing while the investigation continued. Just a temporary apartment, no address, listed no mail. I didn't argue. I didn't ask when I'd be able to go home. I wasn't sure what counted as home anymore. Detective Monroe visited that next morning. She brought a notepad and sat on the edge of the chair like she didn't want to commit to being there too long. She asked me to describe what I remembered. I told her what I could, waking up early, walking to work, checking groceries off a list, folding receipts in half, watching the kids from across the street when they left for school. I said I'd wanted to reach out, but it felt like I wasn't supposed to, like something was holding me back, not physically but inside. She asked if anyone had told me to stay away. I said no. Not in so many words, but I'd felt it, like a warning without sound. She told me Greg had never filed a restraining order. There had been no legal barrier, no court documents, nothing that would have kept me from coming back. I stared down at my hands. Then why did it feel like I couldn't? I asked. She didn't answer. A few days later, she showed me a sample of my handwriting, an entry from one of the journals I used to keep in my locker at the clinic. She asked if I'd write something for comparison. I did. When they brought in an analyst to look at both samples, the conclusion wasn't what they expected. It was mine, the same hand. But with subtle differences, the angle of the slant, the way certain letters curve differently, the pressure changes on long strokes. The analyst said it was almost like someone had been trying to copy my writing and got close, or like someone had been relearning how to write the way I used to. I didn't know which answer scared me more. That same afternoon, Ben found out. Not from Greg, not from Rachel. A kid at school texted him a screenshot of the news report. No message, just the clip. He didn't respond. He biked to the edge of town, to the creek behind the old playground where I used to take him when he was small. He stayed there for hours. He didn't speak to anyone when he got home. But that night, he pulled an old Polaroid from his desk drawer, one of me and him at the county fair cotton candy in both our hands, and he tore it in half. The next day, Detective Monroe got a call from a woman named Carla Jennings. She had worked the front desk at Mountain Ridge Pediatrics for nearly 20 years. She said that a year after I disappeared, a woman came in asking to volunteer. She looked familiar, Carla said, but tired, like someone who used to laugh more than she did now. Carla thought it was me, older, thinner, but when she asked for ID, the woman got nervous and left. She never gave a name. We pulled security footage. It was grainy. But it was me. That night, back at the protective apartment, I found something sitting on the windowsill, a small wooden music box. I recognized it immediately. It had belonged to Lila when she was a baby, part of a lullaby set we used to play before naps. When you wound it, it played You Are My Sunshine. I lifted it carefully and turned it over. There was no label, no note, just the tune when it played slow, warped at the end. I told Detective Monroe the next morning. She didn't touch the box. She just asked quietly, "Do you know how it got there?" I said no, but I could feel the answer pressing somewhere just outside my reach. A week later, while reviewing old items from the original case file, she found a key. It had been sealed in an envelope marked Unrelated Locker Contents. It matched a storage unit number in town. Unit 114. The name on the lease, Erica Caldwell. Inside were boxes, stacked floor-to-ceiling old clothes, toys, grocery bags, containers of soup. At the back, under a blue tarp, was a file cabinet. Inside were documents, school records, newspaper clippings, blurry photos of Ben and Lila, some taken from a distance, some up close, and tucked in the bottom drawer a birth certificate. It listed my name, Mara Ellison. But the year of birth wasn't 1981. It said 1976, issued in Phoenix, Arizona. Everything else matched mother's name, birth date, county seal. But I was born in North Carolina. I had never been to Arizona, and that was the moment we realized this wasn't just about a missing person anymore. This was about something else entirely. Detective Monroe placed both birth certificates on the table between us. North Carolina on the left, Arizona on the right. Same name, same mother, same birth date, different year, different origin. Neither looked fake. Both carried state seals embossed and intact. She didn't say anything for a while, just stared at them like one would eventually blink first. I reached forward and touched the edge of the Arizona one. It felt real. Thicker paper, older printing style, but official. She asked if I had ever lived in Phoenix. I told her I hadn't, never even visited. She nodded, then quietly said the Arizona file was submitted in 1998 by someone listed as my legal guardian. That confused me more than anything. I wasn't adopted. My parents raised me in Raleigh. My mom passed in 2009. Dad died when I was in college. No one else. So I asked who the guardian was. She took a slow breath and said, Helen Traz. That name again. First on my death certificate, now on a birth record I'd never seen. She left the documents in my care for the night, said she needed to confirm some state-level records through federal contacts. I didn't sleep. I sat at the little kitchen table in the safe house, the same spot I ate cereal every morning since they'd placed me there. I kept both papers in front of me, one under each hand, like holding them might stir something loose. At one point I closed my eyes and tried to remember my 5th birthday. All I got was the smell of frosting and a faint sound of wind chimes. But even that felt like it could belong to someone else. Greg hadn't reached out. Rachel hadn't either. The kids didn't want contact, at least not yet. But that weekend, Detective Monroe arranged a meeting. It wasn't at the house. It wasn't even at the station. It was held at a neutral facility, one of those family services centers with soft carpet-padded furniture, a corner of toys arranged to look spontaneous. I arrived first. The staff offered tea. I declined. My hands were too cold to hold anything. Greg came in with Ben and Lila. She had grown taller since the last photo I remembered. Her hair was longer. She was carrying a notebook pressed to her chest. Ben stayed close to the door. He looked older than 14, older than I felt. Lila stared at me for a long time, then walked over and touched my hand. "Do you remember the song?" she asked. I nodded. "You are my sunshine," I said. Her lip quivered. Then she threw her arms around me and cried so hard her whole body shook. Ben didn't speak. He just stood there, arms folded, face unreadable. Greg kept his eyes on the floor. When the session ended, we stepped outside into a windless afternoon. Gray light filtered through the clouds like it was deciding whether or not to rain. Greg pulled me aside. "Why didn't you come back sooner?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. Then I told him, "Because I thought you didn't want me back. Because I didn't know if I was supposed to come back at all." He didn't argue. He just nodded once. That was all. Back at the station, Detective Monroe had made progress. She located visitor logs from the clinic where I used to work. Most were digital after 2019, but anything earlier was boxed up in storage. She went through them herself, page by page. There, in faded ink from a June morning in 2018, was a signature. Helen T. No last name. Signed in at 9:12 a.m. Signed out at 2:06. Reason for visit personal. The date was 3 weeks before I disappeared. She began pulling records connected to the name medical, legal, anything with a signature. Most paths went cold, but a few things began to take shape. Helen Traz had once worked for a non-profit health organization based outside Phoenix, shut down in 2003 for ethical violations related to memory and trauma research. The name of the facility: the Foundation for Memory Rehabilitation. The more she dug, the more people seemed unwilling to talk. Phone numbers disconnected, web pages erased, physical addresses abandoned. In the middle of all this, Rachel called. She didn't want to talk to Greg. She wanted to speak to Detective Monroe. She arrived at the station the next morning with a sealed manila envelope. Said she found it in the attic while going through boxes labeled "Donate." Inside was one of my old journals. I used to buy them from a discount store, floral covers, spiral-bound, wide-ruled. The last page was dated the week I disappeared, my handwriting neat and steady. It read, "If this reaches someone else, I need you to believe me. Someone is watching me." He says his name is Dr. Gray, but his badge says something else. I don't know who to tell. If I disappear, it wasn't by choice. Rachel didn't stay. She left quietly, said she wasn't sure what she believed yet, but that the kids deserved answers. Detective Monroe asked if I recognized the name Dr. Gray. I didn't. But the moment she mentioned the badge name Marchand, my breath caught. I didn't know why. Just a reaction like muscle memory. That evening, while reviewing hospital files from a minor ER visit I had in 2020, bike injury left ankle sprain. Nothing major. She noticed something off in the intake records. The attending physician's name was listed as H. Trask. No license number, no contact information, no medical license by that name existed in the state. And yet, there it was. A ghost in the system. I sat on the edge of the bed that night holding the music box Lila had owned as a baby. I turned the key once. It played 4 notes before catching. I opened the lid. Inside, taped under the mechanism, was a slip of paper I hadn't noticed before. It was yellowed from time, folded 3 times. In my own handwriting it said, "You know what's real. Don't let them take that from you." I don't remember writing it, but I knew it was mine. The next morning, Detective Monroe told me she was flying to Arizona. She'd found something a lead on the Foundation's abandoned property, a former employee, a physical location. She said she didn't expect much, but she had to try. Before she left, she asked one last question. "Is there anyone you remember from those missing years? A face? A voice? Anything?" I closed my eyes and said there was a man. Older, deep voice, smelled like coffee and menthol. He used to sit on the other side of the glass and tell me I was lucky. That my family was gone, but I'd been spared. I told her I believed him. I really did. She asked if he ever gave a name. I said yes. He said he worked for the government. And he called himself Dr. Edwin Marchand. Detective Monroe returned from Arizona with more dust than answers. The building that once housed the Foundation for Memory Rehabilitation sat hollow, sun-bleached, and long-stripped of anything traceable. Broken windows, torn insulation, graffiti covering the front entrance. But on the second floor, in what had once been an administrative office, she found a file cabinet wedged behind a row of rusted metal chairs, locked but intact. Inside was a single envelope labeled with my name, M. Ellison, Long-Term Protocol Whisper. Tucked inside were a photo of me at 18, shoulders slumped, expression blank, and a stapled list of coded entries. Dates, initials, short clinical notations. One of them read, "Subject demonstrates high responsiveness to identity suggestion therapy. Implanted narrative appears stable. Continued monitoring recommended." Another note, handwritten and paperclipped to the top, read, "Motherhood has enhanced compliance. Emotional anchors strong but manageable. Observe proximity effect." It was signed with 2 initials, HT. Detective Monroe didn't call me right away. She sat with it, reviewed it, then brought it in person. I opened the envelope slowly, trying not to smear the ink with my hands. The photo, whatever day that had been taken, I didn't remember it. But it was me. Same cheek scar from a bike fall in high school. Same freckle near my eye. She asked if any of it triggered a memory. I said no. But something tightened in my chest like a string being pulled too hard from behind the wall. That night I woke up at 2:16 a.m., heart-pounding sweat under my arms. I sat up slowly, eyes adjusting to the dark. A memory came back, not a full moment more, like an echo, a voice saying, "She won't remember this part." Calm, male, followed by footsteps. I wrote it down on the back of a receipt and tucked it in the pocket of my sweatshirt. I didn't want to lose it again. The next morning, I told Detective Monroe everything. She didn't question it. She said the timing made sense. That kind of recall often surfaced in fragments, never orderly. She also said something else. She'd spoken to a woman named Carla Jennings, again the receptionist at Mountain Ridge Pediatrics, who'd seen someone like me return a year after I vanished. Carla had found something, a paperclip key, the kind used for old bus terminal lockers. She'd forgotten about it completely. I had slipped it into her hand the day I came in asking to volunteer. She said I looked scared, told her to keep it safe. She never told anyone, not even her supervisor. Just placed it in a drawer and left it there. The key matched a locker number at the downtown bus station. Maria used bolt cutters to open it. Inside was a flash drive sealed in a small plastic bag. It had no label, just a green dot sticker on one side. She brought it to the digital forensics team at the state lab. What they found inside changed the entire shape of the case. There were audio recordings, dozens of them. Most were degraded, corrupted by time or poor equipment. But one file was clearer than the rest. A male voice, clipped and clinical, said, "Subject continues to exhibit signs of loyalty to former life. Emotional anchor strong. Recommend Phase 2 detachment before reintegration. Note: proximity to children triggers destabilization. Adjust reinforcement schedule accordingly." I listened to it 3 times. The third time, I asked them to turn it off. I recognized the voice. It was the same one I'd heard in my dream, the man who told me my family was gone, that I was lucky to survive, that I wasn't ready to return. They matched the voice print to a former government contractor, now operating under several known aliases. The real name, Dr. Edwin Marchand. He had once been part of a cognitive rehabilitation task force working under defense contracts in the early 2000s. His name had surfaced in ethics reviews tied to a disbanded psychological warfare program, one involving trauma reconstruction, identity fragmentation, and controlled narrative immersion. His license had been quietly revoked, but he hadn't disappeared, just moved sideways. He'd reemerged in private sector work, clinical consulting, offshore retreats, small-town wellness partnerships, all under different company names. One of them had recently been registered in Asheville using a shell LLC. That's when everything snapped into focus. Detective Monroe pulled financial records tied to my false identity, Erica Caldwell. Traced rental payments, clinic donations, small bank withdrawals. All of them were routed through that LLC. The paper trail, thin as it was, looped back to Marchand. His signature appeared in registration documents for a temporary clinic that had opened 2 blocks from where I'd supposedly been living. It closed 6 months later. She reached out to her federal contact. Within 3 days, they confirmed that Marchand was alive, operating under the name Gregory Fields, location unknown. But then something unexpected happened. Rachel came forward again. She hadn't planned to, but she found something else in the attic, another envelope marked, "Only open if I'm gone." This one wasn't addressed to her. It had my name on it. Inside were 5 handwritten pages, my handwriting. They were dated 2 weeks before I vanished. One entry read, "He says I'm ideal, that I listen, that I don't resist. He watches me in the hallway, calls it a long-term conditioning sequence. Says they've done this before. I want to run. I want to scream. But he keeps telling me the world out there is gone, that they're all gone. My husband, my children. He says I survived. And if I want to stay safe, I have to forget them." Another page ended with the sentence, "Maybe if I disappear first, I'll have a chance to leave a trail." Detective Monroe sat with those pages for a long time. She didn't speak for almost 20 minutes. Then she slid them back into the envelope and said, "This isn't about compliance anymore. This is about memory theft. Controlled forgetting." I felt sick. Not like nausea, more like vertigo. Like the walls weren't staying where they were supposed to. That night, I pulled out one of my old journals, the kind Ben had kept in the garage. The pages smelled faintly of dust and vanilla. On the inside cover, I had written something I'd forgotten about until that moment. "If I forget who I am, remind me." I didn't know if that note had worked, but it was still here. And so was I. The next morning, we got a call from a man in South Carolina. He didn't give his full name, just said he used to work under Marchand, said he'd seen the news, said he had something we needed to hear. Detective Monroe asked for the address. He gave it, then said one last thing before hanging up. I tried to stop him. I really did. But by then, she was already part of Phase 2. The address the man gave was in rural South Carolina, just past a collapsed barn and a mailbox with no numbers. Detective Monroe and I made the drive in silence. We didn't talk about what we expected. We didn't talk about what came next. She just kept her eyes on the road, and I kept mine on the pine trees that lined both sides of the highway like guards who'd stopped caring. The man's name was Peter Lanham, former neurobehavioral researcher. He opened the door before we even got to the porch. Late 50s, maybe older. Pale skin, hollowed cheeks, thinning gray hair. He didn't ask for credentials, just stepped aside and said, "You're here about Whisper." Then he looked at me like he already knew everything he wasn't ready to say. We sat in the back room, a den with faded furniture and a space heater buzzing low near the floor. He didn't look at me while he spoke. He stared at a spot on the wall as if he'd already practiced this story in his head too many times to change the path now. He said he had been recruited by Marchand back in 2014 for what he thought was trauma rehabilitation research. The idea was simple help survivors of violent loss rebuild cognitive identity by easing them into controlled detachment from painful memories. He thought it was about healing. That's what they all said. They tested it on volunteers first. Then came something called narrative layering, implanting a simple structure, first like a job, a town, a new name. They'd reinforce it with repetition, with imagery, with medication that didn't always get documented. The Foundation kept records under multiple aliases. He showed us a printed document, Project Whisper Phase 2 Protocol. It was short, 4 pages. Most of it was clinical jargon, but the outline was clear. Target the subject during a vulnerable life stage. Grief postpartum transitional stress. Identify emotional anchors. Disrupt natural routine. Insert controlled alternative narrative. And repeat. Over and over until the body moved through the false story like it had always lived there. I asked how it worked on me. He shook his head. Said I wasn't the original target. That Marchand had been observing several potential subjects. I asked what made me ideal. He looked at me for the first time then. His voice cracked when he said, "Because you didn't fight. You adapted. You made their story believable." He handed Monroe a final page dated July 2018, a week before I disappeared. It read, "Initiate isolation sequence. Family connection remains strong. Reinforcement needed. Risk of spontaneous reversion moderate. But containment is still possible." Then came a line beneath it, circled in red ink. "Begin disorientation protocol with porch trigger." I didn't know what that meant. Not right away. But when I looked up at Monroe, I saw it click for her. "The light," she said. "The flickering light." I nodded slowly. It started just before I disappeared. We left that house with no promises. Lanham didn't ask for protection. He didn't ask for leniency. He just said I tried to warn someone once. They moved the facility 2 weeks later. Then he closed the door behind us like it weighed 1,000 pounds. On the way back, I sat with the Phase 2 packet on my lap. The last page described something called anchor interference, the risk that old relationships, especially children, could undo months or even years of implanted structure. It was listed as a known flaw, one that hadn't yet been resolved. When we got back to Asheville, I asked to see the house, just once. Apple Blossom Drive looked smaller than I remembered. The grass was shorter. The porch swing was gone. But the light was still there. Greg had replaced the bulb, the timer, even the wiring. But it still clicked on every morning at 6:30. As we pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car and waited. The porch light blinked once, steady, not broken, just alive. Inside, the house had been repainted, new furniture, new photos. Greg and Rachel had done what they needed to do. But in the upstairs hallway, tucked behind old boxes in the linen closet, I found something that hadn't moved. A canvas tote bag, Inside were pieces of the life I thought I'd lost: Ben's preschool artwork, a baby sock with Lila's name stitched in blue, and a folded drawing. It was crayon on cardstock. A stick figure family: Daddy, Ben, Lila, Mommy. My name was written above the tallest one in red. I stood there holding it for longer than I should have. I didn't cry. I just felt quiet. The kind of quiet that only shows up when the noise has been wrong for a long time. Later that night, I sat on the back porch with the kids. Lila leaned against me. Ben didn't speak for a long time. Then finally he asked, "Did you really forget us?" I told him the truth. Not entirely. Something in me knew, but it was buried so deep I didn't know how to reach it. He looked away, but his hand rested lightly on the edge of my sleeve, and he didn't move it. 3 days later, Marchand was found, living under the name Gregory Fields in Maryland, working as a trauma consultant for a private recovery group with ties to a larger behavioral analytics firm. They arrested him without incident. Inside his home were file boxes, labeled, sorted, names, faces, dates. Some were patients, some weren't. I was one of 11 confirmed subjects listed under long-term structured narratives. 5 had been located. 2 were dead. 4 remained missing. He said very little when questioned, claimed it was experimental, ethical, voluntary. His legal team pushed for mental health evaluation, but the files said enough. They told the story. A system designed to test how much of a person could be rewritten if you found the right lever, if you knew what to erase and what to leave behind. I wasn't his only story, just one he kept close, and I kept wondering why. Why me? Why the letters? Why the photo in the apartment? Why plant traces if the goal was erasure? Then buried at the bottom of a case folder was a document marked Retention Observation. It listed trigger variables that could cause a subject to fracture through the false identity. Children, music, familiar roots, unrepaired memories. The final line read, "Some memories don't leave. They wait." I didn't speak after that for a while. Not to Monroe, not to Greg, not even to the kids. I just sat in the room where I used to fold laundry, listening to the sound of the porch lights click at 6:30 a.m. sharp. It wasn't much, but it reminded me I was still here. And something inside me had waited too. It hadn't left. It had just been quiet. The trial never happened the way people expected. Dr. Edwin Marchand was charged under multiple aliases across 3 states with everything from medical fraud to unlawful experimentation. But the most serious charges, conspiracy to falsify death records, memory suppression under false medical pretenses, those fell into gray areas. The law didn't quite know what to do with a case that hinged on identity, not just being hidden, but rewritten. There were no bruises, no physical restraints, no paper trail that said I'd been kidnapped. Just quiet manipulation repeated until my old life folded itself into silence. Still, the evidence was overwhelming. The audio files, the flash drive, the clinic logs, the Phase 2 documents, and the testimonies, not just mine, but others. 4 of us spoke, 2 in person, 1 through counsel, 1 through a prepared video. The others couldn't be reached or had died under circumstances that remained vague, sealed behind private settlements and closed investigations. I testified before a joint oversight hearing, not a jury. It took place in a bland federal building in Virginia where the walls felt like they were trying not to echo. I wore the locket Lila made me in 2nd grade plastic string, and beads faded from sunlight. It had no clasp anymore. I tied it at the back. When they asked for my name, I gave it in full, Mara Elise Ellison. My voice held steady. I told them what I remembered, what I didn't, what came back, how it unraveled, how it held. I told them how a man convinced me the world had ended, and I was the last thread left. I told them about the mornings I stood across the street from my old house watching my daughter walk to school and not knowing if the ache in my chest was love or leftover programming. I told them about the porch light. One representative asked why I hadn't tried to escape sooner. I told him that's the wrong word. It wasn't a prison. It was a story. And when a story's told often enough, you stop questioning the lines. He didn't ask anything else after that. The ruling came quietly. Marchand would be held without bail pending extended psychiatric evaluation and federal investigation. He would never practice again, never consult, never work in any facility licensed to treat human beings. There were murmurs of further charges, civil suits, federal ethics reviews. But to me, it didn't feel like justice. It felt like closure had knocked once, then turned away. Back in Asheville, Greg and I tried to create something stable again. He never asked to go back. I never expected to. Rachel stayed, but gave us space. The kids lived in both houses, split by weeks, not weekends. It was awkward. But it was honest. And sometimes honesty has to be enough. One morning, I walked through the apartment where I'd lived as Erica Caldwell. It had been cleared out since. The fridge was unplugged, curtains gone. But the table was still there, the one I used to sit at each morning with instant oatmeal and a newspaper I never fully read. I opened a cabinet and found one item left behind a name badge. Erica Caldwell Admin Support. I held it for a long time. Then I struck a match. Not out of anger. Not even out of grief. I let it burn in a small glass bowl I found beneath the sink. When the plastic curled and blackened, I whispered, "I'm not her anymore." I didn't need to cry. I just needed to be done. In the spring, I returned to the clinic. Not as a nurse, not yet. I volunteered in the waiting room reading to kids and refilling bandage drawers. The first time someone asked my name, I paused. Then I said it softly. Mara. Just Mara. They smiled and said, "Nice to meet you." And I said it back. Later that month, a woman approached me during my shift. Mid-40s, nervous hands, eyes searching. She asked if I was the woman from the news. I told her I was. She said her sister disappeared in 2015, no goodbye, no trace. She thinks she might have been one of us. Her name was Amanda. I took the woman's hand, told her I'd help however I could. That moment felt different than the others. It wasn't closure, it wasn't vengeance. It was something quieter, shared ground. At home, things were slow. Lila talked more than she used to. She asked to sleep in my bed sometimes, not because she was scared, but because she liked hearing my voice again. I told stories about raccoons, stealing pie, and trees that whispered names. Ben didn't draw much anymore, but one morning I found a new picture on the fridge. It showed two stick figures, one labeled me, the other Mom. Nothing else. Just that. And it was enough. But Lila still had nightmares. She'd wake up crying, whispering, "Don't let them take you again." I'd hold her close and say the same thing every time they won't. Not while I'm breathing. And I meant it. Detective Monroe declined the commendation she was offered. When the press called her a hero, she said she hadn't solved anything. I didn't rescue a missing person, she told them. I helped someone come back. Off the record, she started therapy of her own. Years ago, her daughter had gone missing for 3 days, came back safe. But Monroe said the silence afterward had never really left her. She understood now. Sometimes what disappears isn't a person. It's the part of you that stops asking if it'll ever come back. The last time we spoke that spring, she gave me something. A photo recovered from one of Marchand's files. It was me, Ben, and Lila under a red umbrella, laughing soaked from head to toe. She said it must have been taken without my knowledge. I didn't remember that day. But the feeling, that joy, it felt real. I tucked it into the back of my journal. Later that night, I found a slip of paper I'd written years before. It was wedged between pages, probably forgotten. It said, "If I ever lose my way, look for the light." I smiled. I didn't need to anymore. because I'd already come home. A few weeks after the hearing, I got a call from an investigator I hadn't worked with before. His name was Simon Dallaire, early 50s low voice, precise cadence. He said he'd been assigned to review long, cold missing persons cases flagged by our testimony. Not reopen them, not formally, just to see what matched. He didn't promise anything, but he asked if I'd come to Washington to look through a set of recovered digital files, some still under restriction, others newly unsealed since Marchand's detainment. I went. I didn't tell the kids. Greg knew. I flew in overnight, stayed in a quiet hotel near the water. The building they took me to wasn't marked just 3 floors. A locked vestibule and a badge swipe I wasn't allowed to see. Inside it felt like a records lab mixed with a trauma ward. Quiet but alert, like grief on standby. They sat me in front of a screen and pulled up a folder labeled 2101 Echo. Inside were hundreds of still images, some grainy, some clearer. Mostly residential cameras, front doors, porches, parks. All dated between 2013 and 2017. All showing moments too ordinary to notice unless you knew what to look for. Phase 1. Observation, Simon said. Early patterns before relocation. He let the silence stretch, then added, "Some of them we haven't been able to identify." I asked why he was showing me. He said my pattern recognition had been sharper than most, that sometimes memory connects in ways data doesn't. The 4th row stopped me cold. A woman on a train platform standing just behind the yellow line holding a bag of groceries and looking at nothing. The file was time-stamped 2016 Silver Spring, Maryland. I knew that face, or I thought I did. Her hair was darker pulled back, but the posture, that quiet stillness, I remembered it from years ago. Her name was Angela Rios. She used to work in pediatrics back when I was Mara full-time, long before the program took full hold. We'd shared coffee in the break room maybe a dozen times. She had a son named David. The last time I saw her, she was humming something under her breath, couldn't remember the tune, but the image of her tapping her thumb on the table came back like breath fog on glass. I told Simon what I knew. He flagged the image, said he'd traced transit records. 2 days later, he called again. Angela had vanished in 2017, formally listed as a voluntary missing adult. Her apartment lease had been terminated without complaint. The son, David, had been placed in kinship care out in Montgomery County. No next of kin ever came forward. The boy's caseworker at the time was a woman named Laura Marks. I didn't recognize the name, but when I asked for a photo, my chest went tight. It was her. One of the facilitators I'd seen around the clinic in my final months under Marchand's supervision. She never wore a name tag, but she moved like someone used to being obeyed. Laura Marks. Soft voice, no signature sent, just a clipboard and an uncanny ability to never blink first. Simon said she'd retired suddenly in 2020. No forwarding address. It was Monroe who suggested we look at not just who disappeared, but who they left behind. Families, friends, kids. If Marchand's system had worked the way it appeared to, then the erasure of one life had to be padded by the misdirection of others. She found something I hadn't noticed. On my old street where Lila and Ben had grown up, there had been a new family moved into the house directly across from ours in 2016. A single father, corporate consultant, 1 child, a girl the same age as Lila. The records said her name was Emily, but school files listed her as Ella M., emergency contact Laura Marks. The girl had vanished from the district just 4 months after I resurfaced. No withdrawal notice, no last day. The family's lease ended early. I never saw a moving truck. We asked for the full enrollment packet. It took some maneuvering, but Monroe pulled it. The child's medical history was blank. No vaccinations on file, no pediatrician listed. But there was one form standard contact release that bore my signature. Except it wasn't mine. It was a near match. Close enough that someone unfamiliar wouldn't question it. But the loop on the R was wrong. The A leaned left, not right. It felt like looking at a ghost in my own handwriting, and I knew then it hadn't stopped with me. Simon called later that week, said the name Ella M. had come up before twice in unrelated federal filings. Once as a dependent listed on a grant application for rural neurological research. Once in connection with a foster care audit in Idaho buried in an unredacted appendix, both tied back to aliases used by staff known to have worked with Marchand in earlier projects. He didn't say the word network, neither did I. But it hung there between us, waiting to be said. Greg asked gently if I was going to keep following it. If maybe it was time to stay still, be present, let the dust settle. I told him I didn't have an answer yet. I wasn't chasing ghosts, but I also wasn't ready to look away. Because if Angela Rios was out there somewhere still half alive under a name not her own, then I owed her the same fight someone once gave me. That night after the kids went to bed, I opened the drawer where I kept the recovered items from those lost years. The bracelet, the keys that never matched any lock, the paper with coordinates I'd memorized and still didn't understand. I found the smallest object, a strip of cloth from a volunteer badge I used to wear at the clinic. Faded red with one word still visible. Welcome. I held it between my fingers and thought of the girl with no pediatrician, no record, and someone else's mother's name on her school form. Then I turned off the lamp, let the room go dark, and sat with the silence until it didn't scare me anymore. Because I wasn't just remembering. I was watching now, and I wasn't the only one. I didn't go back to work right away. Some part of me thought I might, that I'd ease back into old rhythms, sort through files, follow case closures the way I used to. But something had shifted. Not just in the system, in me. I started spending more time with Greg on the back deck, just watching the light move through the trees. The kids still asked questions now and then, but not the kind that needed long answers. They just wanted to know if I was okay. And most days I was. Not in the way people mean when they say everything's fine. I mean okay like steady, like awake. Angela Rios was never found, not formally. Her son David stayed with his aunt in Maryland, started middle school that fall. I sent a letter, nothing direct, just a note saying I remembered her, that I hoped he was safe and seen. I never got a reply, and I didn't expect one, but it felt right to write it. Simon Dallaire took a leave of absence not long after our last call. Burnout, they said, but I think it was something else. When you spend enough time looking into rooms people were never supposed to escape, eventually the air follows you out. He left a message on my line the day before he stepped back. Just a few words. They don't always know they're missing. I saved it. As for Laura Marks, if that was even her real name, the trail ended in Oregon. She bought a small parcel under a different identity, paid in cash. No utilities, no paper trail after that. Monroe tried to run a few more angles, but it dried up fast. Like someone knew we were looking and had already decided how much we'd be allowed to see. We didn't fight it. Not right then. You learn eventually that some doors stay closed until someone else pushes from the inside. There were moments I thought about going public, writing it down, making noise. But the louder I imagined it, the more I knew it wasn't the way. I'd lived through silence, the kind that erases your own name, and I didn't want to trade that for spectacle. What I wanted was steadiness, documentation, a thread someone else could follow when the time came. So I kept records. Quiet ones, dates, faces, folders marked not by title but by memory. And every few weeks I'd revisit the recovered footage, not to chase something new, but to remember what had already been found. The girl called Ella, the almost signature, the vacant porch where a mother once stood and waved. They were still here, in a way, just waiting for someone to hold their shape. I think about the word justice sometimes and how it never felt like what people said it was. To me, it's not about punishment. It's about restoration, about standing in the open and being able to say, "This was taken," and knowing someone believes you. If you've listened this far, thank you. I don't know what brought you to this story. Maybe memory, maybe grief, maybe just the need to feel less alone in the aftermath of something unspoken. But if something in it stayed with you, consider sharing it, so no name gets lost in silence. So someone somewhere sees their own story held and remembered.